Hi everyone, I'm Ben Mims, cooking columnist for the LA Times, and I'm here today to show you how to make my pumpkin maple drizzle cakes. These cakes have maple and orange and lemon juice in them. It's a really nice kind of bright update on the traditional fall pumpkin loaf cake. So the first thing to get started is I need to prep my loaf tins. This recipe uses two 9x5 loaf tins, and it makes two cakes because I wanted the recipe to use one whole can of pumpkin. To prep each loaf pan, what I'm doing is taking a little bit of softened butter, rub the butter along the sides, do the same across the bottom. And now usually you can dust some flour onto this and make it stick, but for extra insurance, I'm gonna take a sheet of parchment paper. You just need something that lines most of the bottom so you can get the cake out. That's all it is. And then I take a little bit of that butter left on my hands and just grease the paper as well. And then I take like a handful of flour, about a couple tablespoons. Just kind of shake it all over the bottom and then tap it on the side, knock the bottom, and then you have a nice kind of even coating of flour. So now that the loaf pans are all prepped and ready to go, we're gonna work on the dry ingredients. 392 grams of flour, which is around 2 3/4 cups. I have a tablespoon of baking powder, half a teaspoon of baking soda, and a teaspoon of fine sea salt, along with 2 teaspoons of ground cinnamon, and then half a teaspoon of freshly grated nutmeg. And I kind of grate the nutmeg onto a board. For half a teaspoon, it's usually about I would say a quarter of a nutmeg pod. And that's just about full half teaspoon right there. So into the dry ingredients. So a lot of recipes call for sifting dry ingredients. I don't really think you need to do that. All it takes is just a good whisk. That'll make sure that the flour is really lightened. There's no lumps of anything. And it'll ensure that all the spices are really well mixed in the dry ingredients as well. We're gonna set the dry ingredients aside while we work on the wet ingredients. So what I have is 2 cups of regular white granulated sugar. And we have a stick of melted butter. So that's half a cup. That I've melted and cooled. I'm gonna add 3 eggs. That's 2. So now we got 3rd one. Okay, so now I'm gonna add the 3 eggs to the butter and sugar, and then 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. And then we're gonna use about a half a cup of buttermilk. Just gonna measure about half a cup. Put this into the batter as well. And now we're gonna use a full can of pumpkin, which is my favorite thing. I love to use full measurements of things like this, of cans or packages, because it's great to just not have any left over. So now that all this is in there, I'm gonna take my whisk from over here and just give everything a good mix. I always like to put my dry ingredients in a bigger bowl than my wet so that I can pour the wet over the dry. Because if you pour the dry on top of the wet, as you're stirring, you kind of end up chasing pockets of flour around. Whereas if you pour the wet ingredients over the dry, then the wet ingredients kind of cover all that flour. And so as you mix, it's kind of like naturally weighed down. You don't have to keep chasing it around the bowl. You just want to stir this together pretty slowly, just until the batter comes together and you don't have any dry pockets left. I'm gonna set this to the side, grab the loaf pans, and we're just gonna divide the batter between the 2 loaf pans. So now you just want to use your spatula to kind of move the batter into the corners to make sure it's really even. Sweep back and forth just to make sure it's smooth on top. But you don't have to be too crazy about it, like so. Do the same with the second. And now these loaf cakes are gonna go into a 375-degree oven for about 40 to 45 minutes until a toothpick inserted in the middle comes out clean. So drizzle cakes are these cakes in the UK. They're usually lemon, where you bake a cake and then you soak it in like a lemon syrup or like a drizzle syrup. And so we're gonna do that with these pumpkin loaves as well. But what I'm gonna do is make a syrup to drizzle over them. It has maple syrup to kind of like amp up that kind of fall flavor. And then I'm gonna thin it out with some lemon juice and orange juice. So I need about half a cup of maple syrup. And then I'm gonna add to that a 1/4 cup of fresh orange juice and 2 tablespoons of fresh lemon juice. And stir these things together. And you'll see that pretty instantly, the maple syrup dissolves in the orange juice and lemon juice, and you have a really beautiful amber syrup to now drizzle over the cakes. I found that when I kind of just like poured it on, the syrup kind of ran all the way to the sides and bottom of the cake. But if you do this, just like, you know, spoonful here and there, just let it kind of very slowly soak into the top of the cake, that the syrup will like actually get over the top of the cake, get into the middle. So now that I've got all the syrup on the cakes, I'm gonna set these aside and we're gonna work on the icing. So this icing is very simple, but what I wanna do is really play up the maple flavor that's inside the syrup of the cakes as well. So I'm gonna make a maple icing on top. So it starts with a cup of powdered sugar and then 3 tablespoons of maple syrup. You always want to add a little bit of liquid, like your maple syrup, at a time and then stir it in, because if you add all your liquid at once, then it can kind of get too loose, and that's when you get a lumpy icing. Got it mostly absorbed, it's getting a little bit harder to stir, so I'm gonna pour the rest of the syrup in. And as soon as all that syrup has kind of dissolved the powdered sugar, you'll see it's like a super thick paste. Just kind of stir it a little bit to make sure, get all those lumps out. So I'm gonna add 1 teaspoon of lemon juice. This should be the right consistency I want, but if it, you know, it's still too thick, I can add a little splash more as well. And then kind of hold it up like that, and you'll see that it is still pretty thick, but it's also drizzleable, and that's what you want. Okay, so now I have the glaze made for each cake. So what you wanna do is pour the glaze directly on the middle of the cake. Just let it kind of fall over the cake, like that. Press it while it's still loose into the sides, into the corners. But you'll see pretty quickly that it starts to set. So you kind of want to do this while it's still wet, kind of coax it over the edges, but then let it go. And let the icing kind of just like drip over the side. And now we'll do the same thing again with the second cake. Okay, so now the cakes have sat here for about 10 minutes to let the icing harden. And you can of course pour the icing on top and then eat them straight away, but I kind of like it when the icing kind of gets that kind of crackly donut glaze. So I'm gonna cut a slice of cake. So this recipe makes 2 cakes. I know you're probably thinking, what do I do with the second cake? You know, it's fall, it's the holidays, you can give it away to somebody, that's the best option. But also if you leave the icing off of the cake, you can wrap the second one in plastic wrap and freeze it for a couple months, and then just thaw it out in the refrigerator, add the icing right before you're ready to serve. It's great that way as well. So the best thing about this cake now is it's time to eat it. The orange juice and lemon juice and all those kind of citrus flavors really cut through the sweet, kind of like warm, spicy pumpkin batter. So definitely more of a cake than a loaf, but it's a fantastic kind of like pumpkin bread update to serve all fall. If you love pumpkin spice, anything else, you're gonna love this.